Deputy Speaker.
Rolling away. Morning. Are there any constituency statements from honourable members? And I call member for Shortland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Today I'll be advising the House of one of the most offensive cuts to a constituents' NDIS plan I've ever seen by the Morrison-Joyce government. The NDIS is being undermined by the Liberals and Nationals, and they are cutting the support packages and plans of vulnerable Australians. In a country as prosperous as ours, and one that prides itself on being the land of the fair go, this is just not on. I am so angry, and Labor will not cop the ongoing attacks by the Liberals on the NDIS. Ian from Belmont South is vision impaired and has had a guide dog for 40 years. The provision of this guide dog has been part of his NDIS plan until a recent review by a bureaucrat who conducted it in December and determined that it was not, and I quote, reasonable and necessary for this vision impaired man to have funding for a guide dog. Let me repeat this, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Morrison-Joyce government has cut funding to a man who is blind for his guide dog. How can this happen in Australia in the year 2022? And the reason provided by the National Disability Insurance Agency for this cut is that Ian has been provided funding for an extra 2 hours for a carer a week, and so there is no need for a guide dog. What a load of utter garbage. How can they equate an extra 2 hours of caring funding with the loss of a guide dog? This is what this government is resorting to now, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, unfortunately, the internal review by the National Disability Insurance Agency confirmed this savage cut, and so Ian is forced to go through the appalling and time-consuming and expensive process of appealing to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. He shouldn't have to do this. I call on the Minister to personally intervene to restore the funding to ensure that this funding is provided to Ian for his guide dog. A vision-impaired participant in the NDIS who's had a guide dog for 40 years and recently funded by the NDIS should not be a victim of this budget cut mentality. We're talking about the quality of life of someone living with a disability here. Ian deserves dignity and respect from the NDIS, and I call on the Minister to act urgently to remedy this situation. Unfortunately, Ian's case is not isolated. This government has broken the sacred bond it committed to when it supported the Gillard government's establishment of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. This scheme is all about empowering Australians living with a disability to live their best possible lives. But this government is cutting plans left, right and centre. They are destroying the lives of Australians with a disability, all with a callous disregard to the impact on those people and communities like mine. So I say I stand with Ian. He deserves to have his guide dog reinstated, and we won't stop until we achieve victory on this very important issue.
Order, and I call the member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Earlier this week I gave a bit of a quick rundown on the flooding situation in South Australia and on the Stewart Highway, a number of the outback highways that were cut, and a bit of an update from that point. I also spoke about the area done to the incorporated areas in councils and in my own council and on my own farm, the damage that was done, particularly to the roads of the Kimber District Council. This is a council of about 1,040 people with probably in excess of $5 million worth of road damage alone. So it's been a pretty challenging event. But the disaster recovery financial funding arrangements are now in place, and I thank both the state government for getting that organised, that claim, and then Minister Mackenzie for turning it around so quickly, I think in about 48 hours. And I thought I might just run through for the benefit of those local councils and communities just what that entails. It's 50-50 state federal funding, and it covers in this case 14 local government areas, and that includes the unincorporated areas of the pastoral unincorporated land, which is covered by the Outback Areas Authority. It includes the Cleve, Coober Pedy, Elliston, Flinders Ranges, Franklin Harbour, Grant, Kimber, Lower Eyre Peninsula, Port Augusta, Roxby Downs, Streaky Bay, Tumby Bay and Whyalla councils. Now, it's important to note for these councils that this funding will cover assistance to help state agencies and councils cover the costs associated with delivering exceptional relief and recovery measures within impacted communities that go beyond the capacity of state and local government, and may include activities to protect the general public and prevent damage to residential areas. And it goes on, it is also for the restoration of essential public assets, and the measure provides financial assistance to help them with the cost of restoring and repairing eligible essential public assets of infrastructure damaged as a direct result of disaster to their pre-disaster standard. Also, it covers emergent works such as removing debris, temporary repairs, which are undertaken immediately after the disaster to enable an eligible asset to be operational. Now, the important part about this is these areas that have been affected can now budget and plan and get on with the job of the restoration process. It's tough enough being a councillor or a CEO in a small council and wondering how on earth you're going to deal with these issues. To know that the governments at all levels, as I used in a radio interview, we've got your back. This is the insurance operation that means you can confidently go about your work in the future. So I look forward to all those assets, particularly around the ones that I drive on, being restored.
Order. And I call the member for Franklin.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In Tasmania yesterday, public schools went back to school. And I want to wish the students and the parents well as they deal with the challenging times of living with COVID-19 during this school year. But I also share the frustration of many parents on Hobart's Eastern Shore about what this means for traffic delays, particularly around the Mornington roundabout. This roundabout has been identified for a very long time as a problem. There are accidents on it on a regular basis, but importantly, the congestion is incredible and it backs up every afternoon and causes huge inconvenience. It was first identified by the current state Liberal government in 2020 as a problem high priority spot to fix. And then, of course, we had the May election last year, a year early, and nothing from the state Liberal government in terms of a commitment to fix this major congestion point on the Eastern Shore. It is the intersection of several major highways and it causes massive problems every afternoon. And the government, all they committed to was to do a study. Anyway, they were obviously successful at the election and they've done a study and they got the results in October, and here we are with the school year going back. We're in February and still nothing from the government about what are the solutions for the Mornington roundabout. What is the state Liberal government going to do with this major piece of infrastructure that everybody knows has been a problem for years? It was last designed under the former state Labor government many years ago, and we knew at that time that it had a lifespan of 10 to 15 years in terms of the solutions around it. Since then, of course, Hobart's Eastern Shore has continued to grow with many housing developments, and that congestion has continued to grow. And we know that this is a very significant problem. It's affecting productivity, economic activity, but importantly, it's impacting on people's lives every single day. The state Liberal government needs to do better, and the current federal government needs to get involved in what is a major intersection of a major Tasmanian highway on the way down to the airport, the Tasman Highway, that it intersects with. This is a priority corridor for both governments, and we have heard nothing about how the Mornington roundabout is going to be fixed, and my residents on the Eastern Shore have frankly had enough. They've had enough of government promises, of delays on projects, of not enough happening, particularly in southern Tasmania, from the current federal Liberal government. They seem very focused on the northern seats, and I get that. They want to win an election, they've got marginal seats, but that does not mean that the people in southern Tasmania who need critical infrastructure should miss out. And what it means is that the state and federal Liberal governments need to invest and show some serious solutions for what is going to be happening to the Mornington roundabout on Hobart's Eastern Shore.
Order. And I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise to put on record my congratulations and appreciation for the many residents of Wentworth that were honoured in the recent Australia Day Honours Awards. If you'll forgive me, I would like to read their names into Hansard and what they've been honoured for. Dr Helen Nugent, who was made a Companion of the Order of Australia for eminent service to people with disability through leadership of social and economic policy reform and implementation, as well as to business, to the arts and the community. Mr John Hardigan, AA, made an Officer of the Order of Australia. Many people would know Mr Hardigan for distinguished service to the media industry, to Indigenous welfare and to sport. Mr Rodney Graham Sims, made an Officer of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to public administration and economic policy and regulatory roles, a role that he continues to perform, a service he continues to perform. Professor Leslie Burnett, made a Member of the Order of Australia for significant service to pathology and to medical research. Emeritus Professor Andrew Durbach, also made a Member of the Order of Australia for significant service to the law, human rights and tertiary education. Professor Mark Hertzberg AM for significant service to haematology, tertiary education and research. Mr Rick Holliday-Smith, who I know personally for significant service to business through a range of roles and organisations, made a Member of the Order of Australia, an AM. Mr Nicholas Parkle AM for service to community health, particularly people living with HIV/AIDS and healthcare delivery. Emeritus Professor Ari Rutem made an AM for significant service to tertiary education and to public health. Mr Laurie Sutton AM for service to the not-for-profit sector and business. Dr Jeffrey Simmons for service to medical research, particularly through gene therapy. Mr Adrian Boss, awarded a Medal of Australia, awarded a Medal in the Order of Australia, OAM, for significant service to the community, particularly through cycling programs, something close to my own heart. Mr Mark Cotter for service to Surf Lifesaving and President of North Bondi Surf Lifesaving Club for a number of years, and someone who I will still work with very closely and who I was able to celebrate with on Australia Day. Mr Jacob Enoch, OAM as well, for service to the community through education. Mr Alan Joffe, OAM, for service to the Jewish community. Ms Jane Joes, OAM, for service to the community through cultural and charitable organisations. Mr Donald McGarry, OAM, for service to the law and to music. Mr Kevin O'Rourke, OAM, for service to the law. Mr Stuart Bailey, Emergency Services Medal for a distinguished service as a member of an Australian emergency service, particularly during his time in surf lifesaving and surf rescue. And finally, Major General Christopher Field, DSC, AM and CSC for distinguished service in the Middle East region and in US CENTCOM for the period March 2020 to October 2021. All these Australians deserve our thanks.
Order. And I call the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Morrison government crows about the unemployment figures, but turns a blind eye to the human damage inflicted by the rapid growth of insecure work across our nation. Over the 8 long years of the Coalition, we've seen flatlining wages and rampant casualisation of our workforce. This government doesn't want it known that around 3.4 million Australians are in insecure work, casual gig workers, freelancers, short-term contract workers, or that when the pandemic began, casuals lost their jobs 8 times faster than those in more secure forms of employment. They're working in hospitality, in aged care, cleaning, manufacturing, retail and virtually every other sector. In my electorate, I've seen firsthand the human impact job insecurity is having on workers and their families. Uber and rideshare drivers who work across my electorate are contacting me in despair. They play a vital transport role, but they have none of the fundamental rights of the rest of the Australian workforce. They have no minimum wage, they have no long service leave, no annual leave and no family leave, and above all, they have no job security. This is wrong. The denial of natural justice undermines the great Australian tradition of dignity for all workers and a fair go. There's a rich history of maritime employment in the Geelong region, in my region. However, our maritime workers' pay and conditions are under immediate threat. The Maritime Union of Australia is battling Zvista, a subsidiary of the Mast Group, to retain maritime workers' hard-fought rights. Svitzer has applied to terminate its collective agreement with its entire Australian workforce and push workers back onto the bare legal minimum wage and conditions. It's a deliberate attempt to cut the pay and conditions of workers and push them into insecure work, instead using labour hire. Workers are being ripped off by Svitzer, who want to cut their pay. I stand here in support of the MUA in condemning this shameful behaviour by SFISTA. I reject and condemn any attempt to exploit the Fair Work Act to undermine wages and conditions. Labor's Secure Australian Jobs Plan will fix this. In government, we will tackle the worst employment practices that leave hundreds of millions of Australians in insecure work, introducing criminal penalties for employers who rip off their workers, and importantly, same job, same pay. And will cap the number of times a person can be employed on fixed-term contracts. Insecure work has been allowed to flourish under the Morrison government. Under Morrison, Labor won't walk away. Unlike Morrison, Labor won't walk away from the millions of workers impacted by insecure employment.
Order, and I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. An important part of my plan for Ryan is to protect our local lifestyle, protect our community so that my kids and their kids could grow up enjoying everything I did and more. Our local environment is one of the most important aspects of this incredible lifestyle that we enjoy in Brisbane's western suburbs. Over the last few years, I have worked to keep our local environment clean and green, as well as contribute to our national targets to transition to renewable energy. Investing in clean energy sources is an important part of Australia's long-term emissions reduction plan to deliver net zero emissions by 2050, and Australians are already playing their part in that. We have the highest rooftop solar uptake in the world. 1 in 4 Australians on their home have solar, and I am pleased to be one of them. We are also putting practical solutions into the hands of local community groups and businesses, as well as households. Solutions that not only reduce our carbon footprint, but also lower electricity costs so that Australians can get back to the things that matter most and not worrying about their power bills. Our local not-for-profit organisations are the heart of our community in the Ryan electorate, and I am proud to have secured $67,000 for these organisations to improve their energy efficiency practices and technologies. The Morrison Government Powering Communities program provides funding to not-for-profit organisations to reduce their energy use, improve energy productivity and reduce carbon emissions. These organisations can use the funds to upgrade equipment to reduce energy consumption, invest in energy monitoring and management systems, and invest in on-site renewable energy and solar-connected batteries. Some of the upgrades that I have fought hard to see funded in our local area include the West Tarong Bowls Club, who have purchased energy-efficient equipment, while the Bellbarry Muggle Men's Shed, the Pullen Vale Progress Association, the Riverside Family Church, the Toowong Uniting Church, the Kenmore District Kindy and C&K Indooroopilly, a very diverse group of community organisations, have all installed brand new solar panel systems thanks to the support of the Morrison government. Particularly fantastic to hear was the Kindy, the Kenmore District Kindy, was not only getting benefit from their solar panels on emissions and energy reduction, reducing their energy costs, but using them to help educate our next generation on the important steps that you can take to protect our local environment. I myself have these conversations with my son Theo, who at 4 is already a bit of an expert. Last week I was pleased to show the Assistant Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction, the member for Goldstone, the McIntyre Centre to see their new solar panels and speak about the impact these new solar panels will have for the centre, taking money out of their power bills and investing it back into those community groups that need them most.
Order, and I call the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There are deep cultural and institutional shortcomings in Australia that continue to put women at risk and that continue to mean women face inequality and experience harm. This week, we've considered the Jenkins report, heard from Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins. It seems to me that the message we need to get as decision makers, and particularly as men, is that it's part of action and for change. Inequality, mistreatment, disrespect, these are all matters that require cultural change to our systems and our laws. There are structural forms of inequality too. Today, I want to speak about what might be regarded as a relatively minor form of that built form inequality, namely the fact that throughout our neighbourhoods you will find community sports facilities that reflect a lack of fairness and respect for women and girls. That has been the case for a long time. In the last few years, the AFLW phenomenon has shown us what we've been missing in not being able to support and cheer for women athletes playing our distinctive national sport. But it's also shown that football clubs around Australia simply don't provide adequate facilities for women and girls. And even in sports with a long history of female participation, it's often the case that the toilets and change rooms have been designed and provided for men and boys. The reality is that sports and community facilities for women and girls are generally abysmal if they're not absent altogether. And that's not right and it's not fair. And to the extent that it means women have to change in the car or outdoors, it is ludicrous and it is unsafe. Deputy Speaker, next year Australia and New Zealand will host the Women's World Cup, the premier international football tournament, the tournament for the World Game, a different but no less beautiful kind of football. And again, at a time when Australia should be showcasing not just the Matildas and my constituent Sam Kerr in particular, but all the incredible young footballers coming through who will be inspired by the event, we know that facilities to complement that interest aren't good enough. Unfortunately, the Morrison government's approach in this area took the form of the thoroughly rotten Sports Rorts program that included at least one case where a project received money on the basis of upgrading female facilities, even though the club in question had no women's teams. Deputy Speaker, I know there are facilities in my community that need to be upgraded, and that includes both high-level facilities for teams like the Dockers AFL-W side at their training HQ, the Arc in Coburn, and where they play at Fremantle Oval, in addition to the facilities at numerous local sports clubs. The Spearwood Dalmatinoch Club has put its hand up to be a training ground for the Women's World Cup, but the Morrison government is yet to make clear how it will support facility upgrades that will be necessary as part of legacy commitments we've made as the host nation. Deputy Speaker, we cannot continue to have a government that perverts community sports funding for its own political interest while neglecting to address the deeply substantive...
The honourable member's time has expired. I call the member for Casey.
And thank you, Deputy Speaker. All of us know here in the House of Representatives that to do our job to the best of our ability, we work in partnership with our local community. And in that vein, I want to thank in this speech so many members of the local community that have worked so hard in partnership with me in a range of areas. I've spoken previously of my local Apprentice and Trainee of the Year awards and the members who've judged those awards over a long period of time. I want to today thank those members of the local community who volunteered their time to judge my annual Anzac School Essay Writing Prize. Anthony McAleer, Roger Burness, Ray Yates, Otis Heffernan-Wooden, Caroline Evans, the late Don Parsons, a dear friend of mine, his daughter Talia Parsons as well. Of course, as we know, we also have a number of local grant programs where we consult with community members on assessing those applications and receive their advice. I want to thank those people who've given their time in assessing those over a long period of time. The Local Sporting Champions program, I want to thank Lee Nolan, Julie McDonald, Randall Bouchier and Beck Mitchell. The Anzac Centenary and Armistice Centenary Grants program, obviously a few years back, Ray Yates, Brigadier Michael Phillips retired, Councillor Jim Child, Anthony McAleer again, Margie Sank, Bob Ganaway and Sue Thompson. For those that have assessed the Stronger Communities Grants and Volunteer Grants and Powering Community Grants program, Brett Whelan, Caroline Evans, Tony Madden, Chris Dowling and Debbie Sadlier. The Community Environment Grants program, I want to thank Malcolm Calder, Morris Maxwell, the late Maureen Bond and Melissa Carmody, who represented the Yarra Ranges Council. And finally, the Local Schools Community Fund. Again, former principals and current principals, Ray Yates, Peter Leonard, Sally Broadley, Stuart Miller and John Faulkner and other people who were prepared to volunteer their time. They've done a magnificent job in volunteering their time to ensure that our community can be the best it can be. And as their Federal Member of Parliament, I just wanted to take the time to thank them individually here today for everything that they've done. They've gone about their business, often meeting in my office late in the afternoon or the early evening, to really make their contribution to the Yarra Valley and the Dandenong Ranges. And so here in the Federation Chamber of the House, I wanted to thank them so much for all that they've done over so many years in many cases.
Order. And I call the member for Cowan.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Jenkins report revealed some pretty ugly truths about this place. And I wanted to just take the time to pay heed to all the women who came forth and shared their stories. In particular, though, Deputy Speaker, I want to recognise the women of colour who came forward with their stories to reveal how gendered violence and harassment is also racialised for them. In particular, I want to recognise Danya Manny. Danya launched a campaign to end sexual violence and has advocated to make workplaces safer for women since 2018. She's a former LNP staffer and was one of the first women of colour to speak out about her own experiences. Despite reaching out to the Prime Minister, she has not been acknowledged. She was not invited to the apology. Since then, Deputy Speaker, many women of colour staffers have contacted me. And the other side to this ugly truth is that historically, the voices of women of colour have been sidelined and silenced in important gender dialogues in this nation. The women who have contacted me are fearful that history is going to repeat itself. Too often, women of colour have been told to wait our turn, but our turn never comes. We've been told that we too will reap the benefits that other women have gained, but that never happens, at least not without us having to take up our own fight. Right now, women of colour who have shared their experiences of sexual violence in the workplace and in public are fearful. They are just as fearful as other women because they experience that same sexualised violence, but it has an intersectionality to it, an intersectionality based on their race and their colour. And I urge everyone here to not ignore that, to not ignore those racialised experiences for the women of colour who have bravely come forward and told their stories as part of the Jenkins Review, and that we consider that in the implementation of the Jenkins Review, because it is only when we all stand together, it is only when we all raise our voices together that our voices gain a momentum and grow stronger. We cannot move forward for women as a nation if we do not consider the experiences and the different experiences of all women, and we need to acknowledge those differences. To all the women of colour and the staffers who came forward, I want to tell you that I'm here for you, and if you need me, call me. Thank you.
Order. Thank the member for Cowan. I call the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Australia Day Honours List, Deputy Speaker, recognises great Australians for the extraordinary contributions they make to our nation. Some remarkable Brisbane residents have been recognised this year, including, fittingly in these times, some extraordinary healthcare professionals. So I congratulate Professor Barbara Leggett, now a member of the Order of Australia, for her work in gastroenterology, hepatology and medical research. And I also congratulate Professor Margaret Turner, now a member of the Order of Australia, for her efforts in the fields of medical research, psychiatry and psycho-oncology. And also Dr. Gino Pecoraro. Congratulations for receiving the Medal of the Order of Australia for his contributions to medicine as a gynaecologist. Also receiving the Medal of the Order of Australia are Janice Blackford for her service to the arts and the Brisbane community, and Margot McKinney, renowned Brisbane jeweller, for her charitable pursuits and service to the arts. Both Janice and Margot are a source of inspiration for everyone contributing to Brisbane's already vibrant art scene and making it even better. I also commend Dilys Bertelsen and Mark Sheridan, both awarded an OAM, for their services to community health and charitable organisations. Their hard work in a way symbolises the contribution of community and charitable organisations who make an immeasurable contribution to the welfare of others, particularly or especially through challenging times like through the global pandemic. Congratulations also to Irma Howe, OAM, for her services to the youth of Brisbane through the Scouts movement. And congratulations to James McClelland, OAM, for his efforts and dedication to the Royal Life Saving Society. A big congratulations to Otway Benson, to Charles Clark, to John Just, and to Dr. Edmund Spork for their outstanding community contributions through a range of community roles and organisations. All have been awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia. Deputy Speaker, a Brisbane resident has been awarded the Australian Police Medal as well. Congratulations to Assistant Commissioner Catherine Innes, and thank you to all of the police around Greater Brisbane for everything that you do for our community. Representing Australia's Defence Forces, a Brisbane local has received the Distinguished Service Medal. To Brigadier Edward Smeaton, thank you for your distinguished leadership. And to Chief Petty Officer Janelle Scrace, who has received the Medal of the Order of Australia in the Military Division for her meritorious service in the Royal Australian Navy. Thank you to both for your service. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the entire Brisbane community, I'd like to congratulate all of the worthy recipients in the Australia Day 2022 honours list for helping to make our great nation the very best it can be.
And I call the member for Gilmore.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, mental health is a huge issue in the electorate of Gilmore. However, sadly, it is all too common a hidden issue. Local GPs tell me that a large proportion of their work is supporting and helping patients with mental health concerns. One local practice alone employs 6 credentialed mental health nurses, as the demand for mental health services is so high, and does about 80 telehealth consultations a week for patients who have complex and enduring mental health problems. So you can imagine the uproar from mental health patients, GPs and psychiatrists when the Morrison government quietly and quickly announced just before Christmas last year that it would be axing the Medicare rebate for item 288, which gives an incentive for psychiatrists to provide specialist mental health support in regional and remote areas. This is one of the cruelest blows for people in areas like mine, a region that has gone through the worst drought. 80% of Gilmore was hit by the Black Summer bushfires, leaving mental health scars we can only imagine, interspersed with 7 disaster-declared floods and then the pandemic. And the Morrison government elects to make it harder for locals to seek the mental health support they need. I've had many representations on this issue, but I want to talk about a handwritten letter I received from constituent Julie. She says, "Hello, my name is Julie. I am 51 years of age. I'm writing to you in regard to the changes with Medicare and my mental health situation. I was diagnosed with bipolar and PTSD 4 years ago and have been seeing a psychiatrist regularly for 3 years, and I was bulk billed. Today, I called for my next appointment and I was told that due to the government changes to Medicare, that it would be at a cost of $635 to see a psychiatrist. I am on a disability support pension due to having a mental health problem, so I am unable to pay $635 per session. But without seeing a psychiatrist, I cannot get my medicine approved. I am doing okay now, but if I can't get my meds approved, my mental health will decline quickly without medication, which I don't want to have happen. I need to see a psychiatrist ASAP to renew my script and have it approved, but at $635, I can't." Deputy Speaker, why does the government not care about Julie and the many other people in my electorate and around the country in regional areas that need to access a psychiatrist? I urge the federal government to ensure there are Medicare incentives in place to incentivise psychiatrists providing services in regional areas.
Order. I call the member for Moore. Only making sure you're awake. I call the member for Herbert.
Definitely awake, Deputy Speaker. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As a Member of Parliament, many of us get to go to different launches and openings, but one recently in the electorate of Herbert really stood out to me, and I think it's particularly important that we highlight it today. A few weeks ago, I was joined by the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Suicide Prevention to officially launch Townsville's Head to Health Centre. Head to Health is an incredible model for mental health treatment and prevention, and most people are quite familiar with Headspace for 12 to 25-year-olds, and Head to Health is similar, but it's designed for adults. As someone who's suffered with mental illness and poor mental health in the past, this will be absolutely a life-changing place for people that who are travelling a bit unwell to be able to go and get the support that they need. It's a one-stop shop for people in the community who are experiencing mental ill health to come in and get linked into the support that they need. The centre is staffed with mental health professionals with different skill sets to address the different needs of people who walk through the door. Whether it's a mental health nurse, a counsellor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, the Head to Health Centre can pretty much help anyone with any mental health concerns. It's an incredible model, one where you're greeted at the front door by someone who immediately comes along beside you, where you are, and helps determine what your next steps are. It's about putting the person first and working with them, walking beside them. It's a no wrong door approach, which means no one gets turned away. Their individual situation is assessed and the right treatment options are worked out. The best thing about Head to Health is it costs the individual nothing. It's absolutely free. Having it free breaks down one of the biggest barriers for people when dealing with poor mental health, something which is unfortunately becoming more and more common. This is a part of our government's $2.3 billion investment in the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan. The plan is about delivering significant reform of the mental health system and ensuring all Australians have access to high-quality, person-centred care. Not only is Townsville's Head to Health Centre doing that, but it's making it extremely accessible. Locals are able to drop in when it suits them. So 10 a.m. to 8 p.m, Monday to Friday, or on the weekends, public holidays, from midday to 8 p.m. So we're reducing the cost to zero, making it accessible for everyone, because there's nothing more important than your health, and that includes your mental health. That's something that I know firsthand. And in closing, I wanted to say that it's a good reminder for us here and around the country. It's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to suffer in silence. And Head to Health in Townsville will be somewhere where people can get the help they need.
Member for Herbert, and I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Summer, seeing family, friends, watching some cricket, reintroducing myself to my children, maybe catching up on a bit of extra reading. That's what normally I would do over the Christmas holidays, but I don't think anybody experienced a summer like that. Now in the third year of the pandemic, we expect the Morrison government to make decisions based on the expert advice that it receives. But Australians are asking, can they trust this Prime Minister to lead this nation through the remaining years of the pandemic? Can the Conservatives get any better? Surely they can't get any worse. This is my report card for the Morrison government on their management of the pandemic so far. Vaccine rollout? Way too slow. Building quarantine? Didn't happen. Creating a tracing app? Didn't work. Money wasted. Rapid antigen tests? Didn't buy enough. Reopening borders? Didn't plan adequately. Preparing our hospitals? They didn't prepare. The Moreton team has been hearing from local residents who want the Morrison government to know how their poor decisions have impacted on their lives. And I quote, Carla said food and rent prices have skyrocketed overnight. In her neighbourhood, the dogs are getting skinnier because people can't afford to feed them. Carla asked, how can people who are on a $250 a week Centrelink payment pay $500 a week in rent? The rise in living costs has stopped her from travelling to see her daughter, who's been diagnosed with cancer. And her daughter needs a procedure but can't be admitted to a hospital because her doctor is worried she might contract COVID. Dolly's daughter works in aged care. Last month, her daughter contracted COVID and carried the virus home to Dolly and her grandchildren. They couldn't get tested and they couldn't get any rapid antigen tests, so they stayed home for 3 weeks with no income until they thought they were clear of the virus. Dolly said, what else could they do? Sana said that when her husband caught COVID, they had no wages coming in for 3 weeks. They had 5 children to feed. She couldn't find any rapid antigen tests, so her husband could be cleared to go back to work. The government is supposed to look after people, she said, but they haven't looked after her family. Lynn, a local pharmacist, says he can't believe how the government has mismanaged the pandemic. He says you don't even have to plan. You can see what has happened in other countries and just cut and paste. Older residents talk of staying home because they don't want to get sick. They are there, lonely and afraid of ending up a statistic because that is what living with COVID means to them. Not getting the health outcomes right leads to poor economic outcomes. Just ask Carla, Dolly, Senna, Lynn and so many others. Prime Minister Morrison, I know, will blame everyone else, but Australians won't forget the summer they lost to COVID because of his government's mismanagement and poor planning. And on a separate note, Deputy Speaker, I thank you particularly for your fine words and fine deeds yesterday, or this morning, whenever it was.
I thank the member for Moreton, and I call the member for Petrie.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start with an email I received yesterday from Terzi, a constituent living in my electorate of Petrie, and the subject line is "Enough is enough." And Terzi says, "The north side has been neglected for too long. How does the south side have at least 3 major highways heading into the city, and the north side does not have one in the third largest city in Australia? The Gateway bypasses the city. For the last 2 days, I've been able to leave my home as the traffic. I have not been able to leave my home as the traffic has been banked up for hours. It takes me 30 minutes to travel 3 kilometres to get to the train station. The journey from Castledine to the city only takes about 25 minutes. The north side of Brisbane has had some of the biggest population growth in the country. Where do you think all these people are going to drive? It's absolute chaos every day." Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, Terzi and 100 others who have contacted me since Saturday are concerned about the Linkfield Road overpass in my electorate of Petrie, in the suburb of Castledine and Bald Hills. The overpass sits at the heart of a heavily congested feeder road, along with the member for Dixon. We've secured funding from the Australian government to fix it in 2018, nearly 5 years ago, 4 years ago at least. The Coalition Government committed $100 million to upgrade and improve the capacity of Linkfield Road and the overpass of the Gympie Arterial Interchange. This was 80% of the funding. As people will know, all roads are built by state governments, and in this case it's built by Queensland Transport and Main Roads from the Queensland Government. Now, last Friday, a forklift on the back of a truck punched through the bridge over Gympie Arterial Road, and now there is a huge gaping hole in the Linkfield Road overpass, impacting traffic every direction. Right now, people will be stuck in traffic on their way to work. Now, this wouldn't be a problem, Mr Speaker, if the Queensland Labor government had acted in good faith for the people of Brisbane North to use the $100 million. Instead, they've delayed and delayed and delayed and put it off because they're not spending money on infrastructure. In 2021, last year, I wrote to the Minister, Mark Bailey, the Queensland Minister, on August 6, September 21, and then again in late November, asking him to bring forward the construction from 2023 start for an October 2024 finish, bringing forward to this year. And he wrote back to me on December 3rd and said, "No, I won't do it and I won't put in sound barriers." Now, last night, Colin and Jenny Stafford wrote to me as well and said, "Luke, why are we putting money into this, fixing that up? Why not just invest in the new bridge straight away?" So, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a real issue. I've secured $100 million for Linkfield Road overpass at Castledine, $800 million for the Gateway motorway upgrade, $120 million for on and off ramps at Griffin and Marumba Downs, and the Queensland Labor government can't start one of those projects. It's not good enough for a fast-growing city in North Brisbane.
Order, and I call the member for Adelaide.
Deputy Speaker, as we speak, Lunar New Year celebrations are continuing around the nation and around the world indeed. And my wonderful electorate of Adelaide is no exception. And I'm very blessed to have a huge Chinese and Vietnamese community in the electorate. Adelaide's always been the stage for the biggest, most colourful Lunar New Year celebrations. And after 2 years of restrictions, and many of the events were cancelled this year, it was wonderful to attend some of them that ran a COVID-safe event. Traditionally, Lunar New Year celebrations start on the first new moon of the lunar calendar and end during the first full moon 15 days later. In Adelaide, this important cultural event is recognised annually with celebrations showcasing time-honoured rituals, music, art, food. Lion dances, lanterns and street parties were common sights in the city and around the electorate, and it was wonderful to see so many getting into the spirit. Now, I was very fortunate to be invited and join the Vietnamese community at the festivities at the Vietnamese restaurant in my electorate. This amazing establishment, Deputy Speaker, is one of Australia's longest and most awarded Vietnamese restaurants. It's run by Mr and Mrs Phan, who opened the restaurant in the very early 80s. And for those of us who know the restaurant well, we know that consistency is key. That's why Mrs Phan still cooks in the kitchen and the restaurant has maintained its original charm. So why mess with perfection? And it is perfection. Today, their children, Linda and Ben, Mr and Mrs Phan's two children, run the restaurant and continue this wonderful, wonderful tradition. I've known the family for many years. In fact, I coached Ben football when he was a young lad, when he played with my boys. The Vietnam restaurant celebrated with music, dragon dances, fireworks, firecrackers, to the joy of the many, many patrons that were there. I particularly enjoyed feeding the dragons, the lucky envelopes. It's always a great event. And my thanks and congratulations go to all the amazing, talented performers, and of course the food, as always, was amazing. Deputy Speaker, the electorate of Adelaide is truly spoilt for choice when it comes to culture, diversity and amazing places to eat. And a lot of these restaurants have done it tough this year with COVID and last year. Deputy Speaker, this year is the year of the tiger, and the tiger is known as the king of all beasts, symbolising strength and courage. And we can certainly use some of this spirit as we enter our third year of this pandemic. To all the families celebrating Lunar New Year, I wish them the best of luck, and Kung Hoi Fat Choi.
Shinyali Kwai Le. I finally call the member for more.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. 8 years ago, I successfully secured an $86,000 federal ANZAC Centenary grant to build an iconic memorial arch for our local community as a permanent reminder of the 100th anniversary of the ANZAC landings at Gallipoli for future generations of Australians to remember. Overlooking the Ocean Reef Marina, the commanding stainless steel and glass structure is 12 metres wide and 6 metres high. The design is based on the passage of light being drawn through a portal entrance along a ceremonial east-west pathway into a circle composed of 100 elements commemorating the 100 years of ANZAC tradition and service towards the setting sun. Each year, the memorial attracts thousands of local families who gather in the grounds of the Ocean Reef Sea Sports Club at sunrise for the annual dawn service, as well as commemorations for Remembrance Day and Vietnam Veterans Day. Today, impending civil construction works associated with the redevelopment of the Ocean Reef Marina makes it necessary to relocate our treasured ANZAC Memorial Arch. I'm working in cooperation with the Joondalup City RSL and Development WA to secure the necessary funding to relocate our iconic Centenary of ANZAC Memorial Arch to a prominent, suitably landscaped and more permanent site overlooking the redeveloped Ocean Reef Marina. The new location will provide families with a special place at the heart of the newly developed Marina Precinct to gather, reflect and pay their respects for many generations to come. I strongly make the case, based on merit, for federal support towards the relocation of the memorial to a new permanent site, and I call upon the Minister for Veterans Affairs to favourably consider the application. This ANZAC Day, we look forward to being able to gather in person for public ceremonies once again, after 2 years of pandemic restrictions. The ANZAC spirit and tradition of courage, service and mateship remains stronger than ever after more than a century. Never more so than during the past 2 years, when pandemic lockdowns cancelled suburban ANZAC services across Australia. Millions of Australians gathered on their driveways at dawn to remember and observe the ANZAC tradition. Looking to the future, our iconic centenary of Anzac Memorial Arch, located in a prominent, suitably landscaped site overlooking the redevelopment Ocean Reef Marina, will provide families with a special place in the heart of the newly developed Marina Precinct to gather, remember and pay their respects to our veteran community for many generations to come.
Order, and I call the member for Maribyrnong.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
Listen, I rise today to speak about a matter which has been raised with me by the Victorian chapter of the Vietnamese community in Australia. I attended Lunar New Year celebrations recently, and they raised with me an incident which occurred on the 27th of January 2022 at Amy Park during the World Cup qualifier match between the Socceroos versus the Vietnamese national team. In supporting the Socceroos, members of the Australian Vietnamese community decided to wear garments such as t-shirts, scarves or hats that carried the symbol of the Vietnamese heritage flag. The flag is of yellow background with 3 horizontal red stripes in the middle and is well recognised by federal and state governments. It's even been recognised by councils in Australia as well as overseas. What happened is that there were demands made by the Amy Park security to members of the Vietnamese community that if they wanted to attend the soccer match in support of the Socceroos, they had to take their belongings to their cars, bin those scarves, hats and handheld flags, which reflect the old flag of the Republic of South Vietnam, known as the Heritage Flag. The scarves and hats had the symbol that I've just outlined, and they were asked to remove them. During the soccer match, authorities in uniform approached and blocked the view of at least one member of the Vietnamese community of the game. The police made requests and eventually took possession of a yellow scarf that he was wearing around his neck, which resembled the colours of the Vietnamese heritage flag. We know that the Vietnamese community in Australia is proud of their heritage, but also embracing Australia and our values of freedom and democracy. I also mentioned that Vietnamese soldiers and Australian diggers paid the ultimate sacrifice under the 2 flags, Australia and the heritage flag, during the Vietnam War. Over the past 47 years, under both flags, the Vietnamese community has made significant contributions to the Australian community. The Vietnamese community has always been resilient, harmonious and embraces Australian values. I'm puzzled, and I don't understand why the Vietnamese community was specifically targeted by authorities not to wear scarves and hats. I think that the community is owed answers. I'm interested to know what questions were raised by, if any, were raised by the Vietnamese government to the Australian government. I do also believe fundamentally that the investigation there should be a formal investigation and a briefing provided to both the Australian community and also those of Vietnamese heritage in Australia. If you can't wear a scarf and reflect a political view, then I think we've got a very low bar of respecting our history.
Order, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Ensuring people in regional Australia have the very best access to the very best quality healthcare continues to be a priority for this government. A great example of this is the recent funding announcement made last Thursday in my Riverina electorate. A total of $1.87 million has been invested to enable Charles Sturt University to provide intensive, high-quality rural education experiences in Forbes and Parks in the central west of New South Wales through its Three Rivers Department of Rural Health, a multidisciplinary academic and research unit. Now, through the additional local training and placement opportunities, students across a range of allied health disciplines, including physiotherapy, occupational therapy, social work, exercise physiology, speech pathology and podiatry, will have exposure to the delivery of rural health care for those people in those areas. Executive Dean, Faculty of Science at Charles Sturt, Megan Smith, said at the announcement at Parks, "It's great to have our doctors and people to go to them to find out what's wrong with them. But if you've broken your leg or you've had a serious accident, it's the allied health professional who will get you back on your feet. It's the allied health professional who supports the child with a disability so that the family can continue to function. So we need the whole health workforce, and our doctors need an allied health workforce as well, because what's the use of a community having a doctor if they don't have a pharmacist? Good point. Three Rivers Department of Rural Health Director Christine Howard said student presence across these local communities would increase significantly. This will be a boost to health service provision, but will also support the local economy as students spend money in these communities whilst on placement. Additionally, the investment in housing for students also supports local business through property management, security, cleaning and linen services. Charles Sturt, in collaboration with the Western New South Wales Local Health District, the Primary Health Network and local health providers identified these opportunities to increase student placements. The program of work will also increase the opportunities for local clinicians to become involved in teaching, supervising and mentoring of students through rich rural health experiences. The funding will also be used to purchase a 4-bedroom house in Forbes for student accommodation to ensure students have a place to live when they arrive for their placements. Charles Sturt Vice-Chancellor Renee Leon said students in Charles Sturt University's Three Rivers Department of Rural Health live and study in regional Australia, affording them a unique and clear understanding of the health needs of these communities. And that, coupled with the Murray-Darling Rural Medical Schools Network, which the member for Nichols, retiring, just mentioned in his speech, going to make such a difference for my electorate and indeed right throughout New South Wales and Victoria. And I thank and commend the two regional health ministers, the member for Parkes and now the member for Lyne, for their help in that regard.
Call the honourable member for Holt.
Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I wanted to talk about an exceptional group of people and organisations that I honoured on Australia Day as part of the 18th Annual Holt Australia Day Awards. 38 individuals and 6 local organisations were recognised for their contribution to the community at the Cranbourne Community Theatre on a rather sultry Australia Day. This wouldn't have been possible without the incredible Holt Australia Day Awards Committee, who comprises Leanne Petrides, Jodie Hollis, Chris Drysdale and Rahimi Barrielli, who I wanted to thank for assisting us with picking these worthy award recipients. For example, this year we recognised individuals like Susanna Cluster for her 31 years of service to the Casey Radio, Harley Meddings for his tremendous volunteer work at the Cranbourne Information Support Centre, or Community Information Support Cranbourne as it's now known, and organisations like the Bakhtar Community Organisation for supporting Afghan Australians in the city of Casey during the pandemic and assisting the settlement of newly arrived Afghan refugees fleeing the Taliban. The exceptional people and organisations that were awarded a Holt Australia Day award this year were Mr Ali Rahimi, Amarol Blom, Andrew Pinkst, Barry Freeman, Bevan Alan Kamaran, Carolyn Carr, Charitha Desanayaka, Damien Ablett, Graham Phipps, Harley Meddings, Jesse Anderson, Jim Wright, Joanne Fitzgerald, John Broughton, Dr Kim Song Vu, Kimberly O'Reilly, Kimben Lim, Les Rand, Lisa Tuthill, Loma Shaw, Margaret Lenders, Maureen Fowler, Nia McMartin, Nicole Treffers, Niroshi Rodrigo, Paul Garrett, Peter Hanson, Polly Freeman, the Reverend Rick Holland, Robert Adams, Robert Ward, Sarah Jafari, Shani Kapaya, Susanna Cluster, Taragan Chimdi, Tim Burgess, Wayne Smith and Yaneth Orlana, and organisations who are Aged Care Reform Now, the Bakhtar Community Organisation, Hampton Park Tennis Club, Multicultural Youth Support Service, Monash Health, the COVID-19 pandemic response, and the CX Australia Limited, SSA. I've read these names into the parliamentary records. They're the names of people and organisations that have just done exceptional work in their time. They're in their own quiet Australian way what they do, by their actions and their deeds, their sense of community, their sense of hope and the inspiration and direction they provide to others is they improve Australia, they improve their community, they improve the environment in which they live. And they do it in an Australian way, not seeking the limelight, not wanting to go out there for the awards and the honours, but because they want to make their community a better place. In my view, what better day to celebrate that than Australia Day? I was honoured to award these people the Holt Australia Day Award.
I call the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to acknowledge this year's winners of Australia Day's awards in the Richmond Valley. Congratulations to Sonia Marks, who was awarded the Emergency Services Medal. Citizen of the Year was given to 2 deserving recipients, Michael Pontefract and Patrick Power. Michael was recognised for his significant contribution to the Richmond Valley community through his work of 40 years as a lifesaver, a rescue jet sea workplace trainer and assessor, coordinator and treasurer of the Charcoal Inn Charity Club. Patrick received Citizen of the Year for serving as a medical officer for the Casino Rugby for 43 years, acting as a mentor for young players, supporting the Casino Women's Rugby team and being a fundraiser for the Heart Foundation, St Vincent de Paul and the Red Shield Appeal. Isabella Anova was awarded the Young Citizen of the Year award for her representation of youth in rural New South Wales. Jacob Urell was awarded the Young Volunteer of the Year for his time spent with the Evans Head Casino Surf Lifesaving Club, patrol member, nippers and carnivals and helps with fundraising. Dorothy Sullivan was recognised for her volunteer work in the community that has spanned more than 50 years, including volunteering for the Casino Historical Society, P&C Committee, school canteens, Casino Show, Anglican Op Shop, Westpac Rescue Helicopter, Casino Beef Week and Friends of Windara. And the Young Sportsperson of the Year award went to Abby Urell, we've got proud parents here, this is the second one, for her dedication to the support of open water swimming. Abby's a member of the Evans Head Surf Lifesaving Club and has been the Evans Head Casino Nipperette of the Year for the past 3 years. And Noah King was awarded the Sportsperson of the Year for being a good role model for the juniors teams and is respected by teammates and opposition. Congratulations and thank you to all the very worthy award winners. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate members of my community who received OAMs and Australia Day Awards at the Coffs Harbour City Council Awards. Leonard Letty was of Sapphire Beach, was awarded an OAM for his service to the community through emergency response organisations. Citizen of the Year went to David Law for his expert student tutoring in sonography, nursing and chemistry, as well as junior sports coaching. Kath Putty was awarded the Senior Citizen of the Year for being a passionate advocate for the growth and development of her community. And the Young Citizen of the Year went to Gurpreet Singh, who volunteers his time to coach and mentor young talented soccer, AFL and rugby league players in the local community. And Riley Saban was awarded the Young Citizen of the Year for being an incredible role model for people with disabilities, and he is certainly that. Thank you and congratulations to all the worthy award winners. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate members of my community who received Australia Day Awards in the Kyogle. Kevin Donaghy was awarded Citizen of the Year. He's dedicated his time for 15 community organisations over the last 43 years. Senior Citizen went to Anne Reardon, who for 40 years has volunteered tirelessly for many organisations as well. And Noe Boldicott was awarded Senior Sportsperson of the Year for his dedication to Kyogle lawn bowls. And Oscar Kennett was awarded Junior Sportsperson for his outstanding achievements as well. Congratulations to all the award winners.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I call the clerk.
It's Committee and Delegation Business, Order of the Day number 1, Standing Committee on Agriculture and Water Resources Report, resumption of debate.
I call the member for Lindsay.
I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move that the Order of the Day number 1, Committee and Delegation Business, be postponed until a later hour this day.
Leave is granted. Please proceed.
I move that Order of the Day number 1, Committee and Delegation Business, be postponed until a later hour this day.
Is there a seconder?
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Clerk.
Okay.
Committee and Delegation Business, Order of the Day number 2, Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs, resumption of debate on report.
Call the honourable member for Lindsay.
I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move that Order of the Day number 2, Committee and Delegation Business, be postponed until a later hour this day.
Is leave granted?
Please granted.
Leave is granted. Please proceed.
I move that Order of the Day number 2, Committee and Delegation Business, be postponed until a later hour this day.
That's a second. The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I call the member for Lindsay.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
I second the motion.
Call the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, it's been clear to me since my election in 2016 that regional communities have been getting hollowed out for far too long under the Liberals. The Liberals talk a big game on the regions, but they just don't do the work that matters. Access to medical services? Woeful. Internet? Under par. We're losing banks and services left, right and centre. And don't get me started on the state of our regional roads and highways under the Liberals. That's why every chance I get, I talk about the importance of rebuilding our regions. We need people, businesses and government services back in our regions. And under Labor, that will happen. Labor leader Anthony Albanese understands the regions and he knows they are a major driver of the nation's economic growth. When we back in our regions, we are investing in a better future. A few weeks ago, the member for Grainler visited Lyons with myself and Labor's candidate for Bass, Ross Hart, who was also there, to announce that an Albanese Labor government will commit $15 million to build a new headquarters for the Royal Flying Doctor Service at Launceston Airport. It's a terrific commitment from Labor for a terrific service. More than 2,300 flights are undertaken by the RFDS in Tasmania every year. It provides crucial aeromedical and patient transfer for regional communities. But it's clear that to maintain this crucial service, new facilities are needed. Labor's redevelopment will include facilities for world-class clinical care and give the space needed to cater for additional medical and fire services personnel in times of crisis or high bushfire danger. By securing the future of the RFDS, Labor will ensure that this essential service retains its central location and accessibility to Tasmanians for all corners of our state. Deputy Speaker, this is essential funding. And I'd just like to give a shout out to John Kirwan, the departing CEO of the RFDS, who, when the RFDS in Tasmania some years ago, 3-person operation, now more than 40 staff providing critical primary medical services across Tasmania, including a very well-used mobile dental van that goes to aged care centres in my electorate. Deputy Speaker, unlike those opposite, who wrought and pillaged the public purse, Labor is identifying the key areas of need and working with communities to deliver the best outcome. Just like our $8 million commitment to upgrade Main Road in Perth and High Street in Campbelltown. We'll be working with the Northern Midlands Council to improve pedestrian safety, install new street furniture, reinvigorating these centres of both these growing towns. And of course, there's Labor's commitment for a $100,000 commitment to fund a feasibility study into bringing world-class dementia care to Campbelltown. Now, some people say, why a feasibility study? We know the unit's needed, and I agree. We know that unit is needed, but a feasibility study is the first required step on that train to getting that dementia unit for Campbelltown. Labor is working with residents from across the Northern Midlands to identify critical dementia care shortages. Deputy Speaker, these commitments from Labor and from the Labor leader Anthony Albanese will help to rebuild our regions and make these towns much better places to live. I come back to my central point, Deputy Speaker. Labor knows that the regions are a critical part of the nation's economy going forward. They've been left to languish for too long under those opposite. They talk the big game. They wear the big hats. They wear the check shirts. They put on the blunnies and the moleskins, and they walk around in the paddocks, but they don't do the work. Our medical services in the regions are woeful. Our internet is below par. The digital divide in regional communities is getting wider and wider under the Liberals. Labor has a plan for the NBN to improve the NBN in the regions and the outer suburbs and bring fibre back into those areas which the Liberals, of course, with their second-rate NBN, have allowed to languish. Labor understands the regions, Labor gets the regions, Labor loves the regions, and Labor will invest in the regions. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn. I give the call to the honourable member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to talk on an issue that is close to my heart and one that touches the lives of all Australians, and that is mental health. Mental health affects 1 in 4 Australians each year, with 75% mental health issues occurring before the age of 25. What's even more alarming is that suicide continues to be the cause of the largest loss of life for young Australians. That is why it's so important that we continue to invest in our mental health services and ensure each Australian has access to the support that they need. I am pleased to say the Morrison government continues to deliver on funding for mental health. Deputy Speaker, I have been a very strong advocate for mental health, and I'm very pleased to update the House that we're keeping up the momentum with my plan to deliver more mental health services on the Bayside. The last time I spoke on this project, it was in November of last year after reconvening the Bayside Mental Health Working Group. With over 20 local mental health experts and community providers in attendance, the key focus of this meeting was delivering for youth mental health. During our previous meetings, the working group had identified youth mental health as a gap in desperate need of being filled on the Bayside. I invited Brisbane South PHN in partnership with Feros Care to present local subscribing an internationally recognised approach to youth mental health. With loneliness and isolation being known risk factors in multiple youth issues, the team presented a prototype for 14 to 25-year-olds. The presentation was very well received, with some excellent suggestions put forward from the working group, which are now being incorporated into the model. With co-producing the service being vital for its success, the meeting was invaluable, and I'm very pleased to confirm consultation with local youth has since commenced on the Bayside. This will inform the final model, which the team look forward to sharing with us soon. I'm incredibly encouraged by this news, as is evidence of seeing our local community groups come together for the common goal of filling mental health services gaps on the Bayside. From these community roundtable discussions, I was introduced to Roses in the Ocean, who I have since partnered with to deliver a pop-up safe space pilot program on the Bayside. This program offers a drop-in, non-clinical alternative to emergency departments for people experiencing emotional distress or suicidal crisis. This model has been developed in recognition of the fact that acute clinical services, such as emergency departments, are not always the best fit for people in emotional pain and distress. These pop-up safe spaces offer an alternative, welcoming environment that can fill the gaps that are currently in our system. As the safe spaces are community-led and locally designed, it enables them versatility to look, feel and operate in different ways depending on the community demographic and geographical needs. They are also staffed by trained prevention peer workers who themselves have experienced this crisis and therefore can connect and relate to others through mutual understanding. Deputy Speaker, there are currently 5 of these pilot programs across Australia, and I'm proud to say that through my advocacy, I have been able to deliver one of these pilot programs in Bonner. I would also like to take this time to highlight the Men's Walk and Talk initiative, which is providing an incredibly important network for men within Bonner. In January of this year, I joined the Men's Walk and Talk to celebrate their first birthday. This group was started by Jeff Kruger and Mitch Rowing and focuses on supporting men by encouraging them to walk, talk and connect with other men in the area. What began as a weekly Sunday morning walk in Carina's Menippi Parklands was quickly embraced by the community and was so popular that in December of last year, Jeff and Mitch added an additional walking route along the Bayside. Now there are over 50 men at both of these men's walk and talks each week. And on last year's Are You OK Day, I was also able to sponsor a sausage sizzle for the men after their walk in Carina, providing a time for them to catch up and get to know some of the new faces.
The question is that the Federation Chamber to now adjourn, and I give the call to the honourable member for McEwen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Well, I rise today in this House to once again condemn the Morrison government's attitude towards Australia's aged care system. Right now, aged care industry bodies, staff, residents and their families are calling out for the government for assistance. And by and large, these calls have been ignored. Every day, my office is contacted by people in our community expressing their concerns and fears for the current state of aged care. Staff are calling the office exhausted. As COVID rips through aged care communities, getting staff to replace those off sick or isolating has become increasingly difficult, and it's led to many homes being understaffed. Some staff have had trouble taking their shifts because the local childcare centres had to close because of positive cases, and staff did not have access to alternative childcare, yet another problem that the Morrison government has failed to address. Some staff had children who either had to isolate or tested positive at the local secondary schools have already had numbers of positive cases reported. It is a bleak time for these staff who care deeply about their jobs and want to provide the best care possible. They have not been provided with the basic support that they need and deserve in order to fulfil their roles. It has been an extremely difficult time for aged care residents as well. Aged care residents have suffered more than any other group throughout the course of this pandemic. Not only does their situation make them one of the most risk groups for serious illness due to COVID, but so many have spent much of this pandemic isolated from family, friends and the support networks that they need and deserve. As aged care homes are forced to lock down in response to COVID infections, many residents lose the capacity to communicate and interact with their family and with their support networks, making the staffing crisis experienced in their homes and the anxieties associated with COVID even more difficult to cope with. More than 2 years into this pandemic, the situation in aged care is just as dire as it ever been. Across the country, we're hearing reports of understaffed aged care homes, residents' buzzers being left unattended and residents being scared and alone. The use of military to provide additional support in the aged care sector is a sign of how desperate this situation is. And yet the Minister for Aged Care refuses to acknowledge that a crisis exists. It's almost like Fonzie when he couldn't say wrong. You can't get the Prime Minister or the Aged Care Minister to admit that we have a crisis in aged care. The first step to fixing any problem is acknowledging that there is one. Yet the Morrison government is too concerned with saving face to acknowledge the work that needs to be done to address the appalling state of aged care in this country. Lack of care for older Australians and Australian aged care residents is endemic to the Morrison government. We have seen time and time again throughout this pandemic the sheer disregard for the lives and well-being of aged care residents. The botched vaccine rollout for aged care residents and staff, the ongoing lack of support for those in the aged care sector, and it's a clear message the Morrison government doesn't give a damn. Older Australians built this country. They worked hard, they've paid their taxes, they've raised their families, and they are the people whom we owe a lot of things that make our country what it is today, with freedom and opportunity. These people and their families who have worked to contribute to this country throughout their lives deserve so much better than this chaotic, unsafe system that is a result of 8 years of Liberal national government neglect, ignoring their needs. Let there be no mistaking, the aged care system is broken. Aged care is an issue that impacts all of us. Australians and their families deserve compassion, safety, adequate care as they move through their final stages of life. We know from the beginning of this pandemic that aged care homes are vulnerable. The Morrison government had 2 years to plan for this situation we find ourselves in now. But like so many things with this Prime Minister, it's always too little and always too late. Older Australians deserve respect, compassion and care, and once again, this government is failing to provide them. It has never been more clear that an Albanese Labor government is what this country needs and what Australians need, especially for older Australians who have helped build this country, and for the staff who can't even get the basics of PPE or RATs to go and work in these situations. They have to go and face every single day the issues in aged care. And I've seen firsthand when I've stood in a room with 20 different bags. They were the leftover possessions of people who died. And you know what? The lazy minister couldn't even be bothered ringing back. This government is a disgrace the way it treats older Australians, and it's a disgrace the way they have treated aged care workers as just a tool to play with. They should hang their heads in shame. And Colbeck, if you had any morals, would resign now.
The question is that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn, and I give the call to the honourable member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The connection of Whitfords Avenue with a realigned Nangara Road at the Wanneroo Road intersection represents a priority infrastructure project worthy of federal support, which will yield significantly more economic benefit than the initial investment. Since the land acquisition process was completed several years ago, little progress has been made in proceeding to the design and construction phase and securing funding. This is a project which I have been actively campaigning in support of over many years, requiring the joint cooperation of the City of Wanneroo and the WA State Government through Main Roads WA. This priority initiative will unlock several hectares of undeveloped commercial and industrial zone land for development, creating a vibrant, bulky goods, transport and logistics hub. It will also improve access to employment and services in the Wangara industrial area for my constituents who commute on a daily basis. I have been working closely with local landowners who have engaged consultants to prepare advanced plans for the construction of new commercial buildings along the realigned Nangara Road frontage. They have secured leases with national tenants ready to establish showrooms, factories and warehouses, creating hundreds of local jobs. Facilitating this development will attract significant investment in construction, totaling millions of dollars for the local economy. In the lead up to the last state election, the WA Liberal opposition committed $10 million towards the roadworks. Unfortunately, the McGowan Labor government is yet to make a funding commitment to this vital economic development project, which is expected to cost $20 million. Upgrading the connection between the residential suburbs of Moore and the vast industrial powerhouse of Wangara will be the catalyst for further economic development within the city of Joondalup, as local residents are able to commute more easily to work and businesses based in Joondalup are able to supply goods and services to customers in the Wangara commercial and industrial area. This critical east-west route to the heartland of the Moore electorate complements the other recently constructed links between the Joondalup and Wanneroo communities in the form of the grade-separated traffic bridges at Joondalup Drive and Ocean Reef Road, which have facilitated more free-flowing traffic between our residential suburbs and commercial hubs. The project has wide support from the local community as it will alleviate traffic congestion. I strongly make the case for federal funding to act as the catalyst for development. The economic benefit realised will far exceed the infrastructure investment. The creation of a community hub in the established suburb of Callaroo is another priority project within my electorate which is worthy of federal support. At the heart of the suburb is a small community facility built around a clubhouse, including tennis courts, a playground and outdoor recreational area, catering for a thriving local community. The 40-year-old facility has long since outgrown its capacity. The local Residents Association has advanced a proposal to extend and redevelop the ageing facilities to create a new not-for-profit community hub. The committee has completed due diligence by commissioning extensive research to ascertain community needs, culminating in a strategic business plan for the next 5 years, including indicative building plans for the redevelopment of the existing facility. The North Shore Community Hub is intended to cater for the existing community base of more than 600 local residents through a program of community activities and events, including health and well-being programs, tennis, pickleball, fitness, tai chi and yoga. The local community recently enjoyed a Christmas carols event and a musical performance staged by the local orchestra in the grounds. In partnership with local and state government, a funding contribution from the federal government is necessary to make this landmark project a reality. The North Shore Community Hub redevelopment has significant merit, and I wish to formally place on record my strong support for a federal funding contribution. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the current highly competitive environment for government funding, these priority projects have both considerable merit and community support, and I'm pleased to advocate for them in the upcoming budget process.
I thank the member for more. The question is that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn, and I give the call to the honourable member for Joe Bell.
Deputy Speaker, my community on the Central Coast of New South Wales is in the middle of a health crisis, but it's not a crisis that's COVID-related. What people are facing on the north end of the coast is a severe shortage of general practitioners. This is a crisis largely of the government's own making, and it's one they've presided over for too long. It's never been harder or more expensive to see a GP on the Central Coast than it is now. And I say that having first worked as a pharmacist in my community in the late 1990s. That's because of the government's refusal to recognise our community as a priority. This has made it harder for local practices to recruit and retain GPs or replace GPs who retire or move. As a result, we've seen a severe shortage of GPs in our community, and the impacts on locals and our healthcare system has been devastating. People waiting weeks for routine appointments, practices closing their books, retiring GPs who can't be replaced. People ending up in emergency departments in hospitals which are already stretched and at times buckling under the strain. We're 3 years into a global pandemic, so you would think healthcare would be a top priority for this government. But clearly that's not the case in the community that I represent. Deputy Speaker, people on the north end of the coast have been calling for the government to fix the GP crisis for years. But all the government has done is sit on its hands. Then, at the end of last week, the government made a surprise announcement. After years of inaction and on the eve of an election, they decided to make Wyong-Gorokan and Chukli-Budgie priority areas for GPs. Well, this is welcome news, and I thank every local person, GP, community advocate who has stood up and fought for this change, and it's a great relief to many people in my community. It is long overdue and doesn't go far enough. The Morrison government has still failed to recognise the severe shortage of GPs across the rest of the Central Coast. There are practices in the Entrance, Bateau Bay and other pockets of the coast that desperately need more GPs. They should be a priority too, but they're still being overlooked. It's only because, as I mentioned, the incredible efforts of our community and advocates and doctors that the government has even taken this step to start to address the GP crisis. But it's not enough. Deputy Speaker, GPs in my community on the Central Coast are stretched. GPs like Dr Con, who runs Oceanside Private Practice at the Entrance. Dr Con has served our community for 12 years, but he has 7 empty consulting rooms in his practice because it doesn't have GPs to fill them, while each day he's turning away people who are looking for a GP. He said to me recently, and I quote, "We've been trying to recruit GPs, but because of the rules that the government put in place, we could not obtain any GPs at all. The current number of GPs that have been trained in Australia is insufficient to meet the needs of our communities. We need to have more options on the table to be able to recruit GPs." This sentiment is echoed by GPs and practice managers across our community. Deputy Speaker, this government may be unprepared to act, but Labor will. We have a plan to end the GP crisis on the coast and in communities like mine across Australia. Unlike the government, we will make the entire Central Coast a priority area, so local practices can recruit from a larger pool of doctors, including overseas trained doctors, so locals can get the care they need close to home when they need it. We'll also make it easier for thousands of other Australians to see a GP in the outer suburbs and the regions by recognising them as priority areas too. In the middle of a pandemic, access to healthcare is vital. We understand that. We know that the further you live outside of a big city, the less access you're likely to have and the worse your health outcomes will be. We understand that GPs are central and underpin healthcare in communities across Australia, working hand in hand with allied health professionals, with nurses and midwives. That's why we initiated the Senate inquiry into GP services in outer metropolitan, regional and rural Australia. And while this inquiry is ongoing, the evidence presented so far is stark. It's made it very clear that there is a chronic shortage of general practitioners across the Central Coast. We have listened to doctors and patients in my community, and we will make sure that practices can recruit the GPs that they desperately need and that people need to see. When we made this commitment last week at Oceanside Private Practice alongside Dr Con, he said to me, and I quote, "This will enable us to have an option to hire new GPs to serve the community so that when people are sick, they have access to care. With a growing population on the Central Coast, we need more GPs. This announcement is the greatest news for the Central Coast, for GPs and for the community. Deputy Speaker, this government has failed the people on the Central Coast. Clearly they don't consider the healthcare of people living in the outer suburbs of the region a priority, but Labor does, and will act. We believe every Australian deserves quality care close to home, no matter where they live.
The question is that the Federation Chamber to now adjourn. I give the call to the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted again to see so many constituents in the Higgins community recognised in the 2022 Australia Day Honours List. This year there were 18 award recipients in Higgins, men and women who've served our community with distinction and dedication, men and women who've given back to the community in a variety of ways. The Honours Day list provides a great opportunity for all Australians to recognise the value of those people who go above and beyond to make a difference to all of our lives. One of the many Honour Day awardees I'd like to thank, Mr Deputy Speaker, is my good friend Dr Alan Finkel AC, who has been elevated to the Companion of the Order, a merit of the highest degree of service in Australia. Dr Finkel was honoured this year for eminent service to science through energy innovation and research infrastructure initiatives, to climate change policy and his contribution to Australia's COVID-19 response, and to science and engineering education. It is no surprise that I'm standing here today to speak of Dr Alan Finkel AC's service to Australia. Alan commenced as Australia's Chief Scientist in 2016, bringing to the role extensive experience as an entrepreneur, engineer, neuroscientist and educator. Prior to becoming Chief Scientist, he was a Chancellor of Monash University. He was the Chancellor of Monash University and President of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. He also holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Monash. Alan led the amalgamation that formed the Florey Neuroscience Institute. Coincidentally, my father-in-law, Charles Allen, also a Higgins constituent, was the chair of the board at the time. He's been chair of the Australian Centre of Excellence for All-Sky Astrophysics and was a director of the ASX-listed diagnostics company Cogstate Limited. Mr Deputy Speaker, some people do not know that Alan is passionate about science education. He co-founded Cosmos magazine, which in addition to magazine publishing, operates a secondary school science education program. He also established the Australian course in advanced neuroscience to train early career neuroscientists and is patron of the Australian Science Media Centre. Quite simply, Dr Finkel is an extraordinary Australian. I was also particularly pleased to see a number of incredible medical professionals honoured by their important work, including Dr Andrew Cattermole AM for his significant service to dentistry and Ms Helen Crowe AM for her significant service to urology and oncology. She's a local nurse practitioner whose research and work with prostate cancer patients is remarkable. Dr Sharon Johnson AM was honoured for her significant service to community health, for her work in occupational hygiene and with the Australian Safety and Health Professionals Associations. I also want to thank and congratulate Professor Prudence Francis AM for her significant service to medical research in the field of oncology, and Associate Professor Leanne Grigg AM for her significant service to cardiology. Professor Robert Power AM was honoured for his significant service to medicine in the field of international development and research. His leadership at the Burnet Institute, right on the edge of Higgins, has led to better health outcomes right across the world. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm delighted their outstanding contributions are improving the lives of those who suffer, and for this to be celebrated in this way. This year's honours list also includes recognition for two sporting champions, cyclist Paige Greco OAM and rower Rosemary Popper OAM, for service to sport for a gold medal at the Tokyo Olympics. Higgins sure does produce some amazing and strong women. Higgins was also represented in the Australian Day Honours Award for significant service to intellectual property law, granted to Mr John Downing AM, and for significant service to business and to the community, awarded to Dr Alan Wine AM. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, Australian Police Medals were awarded to Senior Sergeant Brad Mason and Superintendent Sharon McKinnon, as well as an Ambulance Service Medal to Ms Glenys Winter. I thank Senior Sergeant Mason, Superintendent McKinnon and Ms Winter for their services, in particular for keeping our community safe. Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend all of the Higgins residents and indeed all Australians represented in the Australia Day Honours this year, and express my deep appreciation for their important contributions. Mr Deputy Speaker, service to the community is one of the things that's so central to the love and support that our community provides for us, and the recognition that community is central to a good society. I'm very proud of the fact that Higgins is recognising these wonderful individuals and the important contribution that they have made. Of course, there are so many others in the community, and I'm very proud of the fact that we have a Community Higgins Award as well that is awarded for volunteers. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Higgins. The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of the opinion say aye. Against? I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Monday, the 14th of February 2022.